This episode of Principal Center Radio is brought to you by the Project-Based Learning Network. Dr. Amy Bader, the director, is a professional curriculum writer and the leading expert on standards-based PBL. She trains teachers how to write high-quality PBL units in the Project-Based Learning Curriculum Developer Certification Program, and she teaches leaders how to implement successful PBL initiatives in the Project-Based Learning Instructional Leader Program. Learn more at principalcenter.com/PBL.
Welcome to Principal Center Radio, helping you build capacity for instructional leadership. Here's your host, Director of the Principal Center, Dr. Justin Bader.
Welcome, everyone, to Principal Center Radio. I'm your host, Justin Bader, and I'm honored to welcome to the program today Jonathan Ferris and Tom Hierck. Jonathan has over 34 years of experience in education as a classroom teacher, principal, and education consultant, and currently serves as a field experience coordinator at the University of the Fraser Valley, where he oversees practicum placements for teacher candidates, supervises faculty mentors, and teaches courses on classroom management, professionalism, ethics, and teacher presence. Tom Hierck has been an educator since 1983 in a career that has spanned all grade levels and many roles in public education as a teacher, administrator, district leader, and Department of Education project leader and executive director. He is one of our profession's leading authors and consultants with 41 total years of experience in education. And Tom is the author of 25 books, including his new book with Jonathan Ferris and Kirk Savage, The SNAP Solution, an innovative math assessment tool for grades K through 8.
And now, our feature presentation.
Jonathan and Tom, welcome to Principal Center Radio.
Thanks, Justin. It's always good to be with you and to share some things with your audience.
Thanks, Justin. Great to be here.
Well, let's jump right in to the SNAP solution. First of all, SNAP is an acronym. Tell us what that stands for and what that means.
Yeah, so SNAP stands for Student Numeracy Assessment and Practice, and it focuses in on number sense. And the key part here is that it's kind of a unicorn in a sense because it looks at for, as, and of assessment. And the key part is that it includes practice as well within the assessment itself.
Yeah, and so we also had a little bit of a play on words, right? If you ask educators, what's a subject you struggle with the most, particularly in terms of the thing I love to teach the most in elementary school is math doesn't tend to make the top of the list or very often. And so this notion that maybe it's because of how we've taught math and how we've assessed math. So what if we made math assessment a SNAP?
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the role that this plays. So, typically teachers will have a pretty well-defined math curriculum. They may follow a textbook. They may follow a program with manipulatives and consumables. And often assessment is built into the curriculum. What role does SNAP play alongside or in addition to curriculum?
One of the things about SNAP is that what we wanted to create is an assessment, a one-page assessment that could be filled with curiosity and joy. And we wanted to make it one page, and we wanted to focus on number sense in itself because we believe that number sense is a foundational component of math. I mean, there's so much, there's measurement, there's probability, there's a lot out there. But if we thought, okay, what's the essence? So in the Chilliwack School District, we designed this one-page assessment a number of years ago and piloted it, and it took off. And basically, it's a one-page, it's like a puzzle, and it's very inviting. So it's full of curiosity and full of wonder. And it's like a window into student thinking. And we think it's just really, really powerful.
So that ability to represent, and so, the one pager that Jonathan's talking about, it's a simple document. It's downloadable. You can try it in a variety of different formats. But in essence, you might have the kid put a number in the middle. And then there's a bunch of different ways that they would get to that number. They could write equations for that number. They could count forwards. They could count backwards. They could tell a story. The key part here is in both the simplicity of the tool, it's really easy to use, but the complexity of the evidence it gives you. It allows you to then plan all of the next steps. For me, a lot of my work in the past is focused on what do we do next, right? What's our intervention going to look like? And the intervention has to be as clearly and critically informed as possible in order for it to be effective. I think that's the big win of this particular tool.
So it's helpful if you're listening to this as an audio podcast, as everyone is, to see a little bit of a visual, and I've got it pulled up in front of me. But is the format the same for all grades K through 8, or do you differentiate it by grade level?
Yeah, so kindergarten and grade 1 is a little bit different. It's a little bit simpler than the template you probably have in front of you. And things like counting by 5, counting up, doing some simple sort of inviting concepts that are done at a whole class. And one of the key pieces about SNAP is that there's not a lot of reading involved. And that's what sets it apart from many other assessments. So kindergarten, of course, students are, they're learning to read, but the assessment itself does not contain a lot of reading in itself.
And visually, in the middle of the page, we've got a number, right? Is the intent to have the teacher select a number and then have students do various things with it, like create examples and count up, count down, and so on?
Yeah, exactly. So think of the number 234. If that was in the center, we would ask students to draw an image of that number, represent it. And very often a student will go to base 10 blocks and those kind of traditional pieces. But as Tom was alluding to a little bit earlier, there's a lot of room for flexibility here. So students can represent in animals or in nature, all sorts of different things. And then what we want to do is we want to ask the students to write to describe the picture. So explain what that picture meant. Below that, we would ask them to write it in expanded form. And what does that look like? And then we would want our students to create 3 equations that equal that number. It could be adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. And one of the most powerful pieces, or there's a lot here that's powerful, is write a real life example of what that number looks like. So thinking back to when I was in school, I was never taught to think of numbers in real life. It was just, do the math, do the number. But now I'm asked, what does that number look like outside? Like it could be in nature or, wherever we are, happen to be in a grocery store, et cetera. As Tom was talking to a little bit earlier, we asked students to count forwards and backwards by a number. Then we want students to put the number on a number line. And finally, we want students to reflect on their thinking. And this is a really powerful piece. So the metacognition piece, where you're thinking about your thinking. So what went well? What do I need to be thinking about next time? Did I meet my goal? And what was easy? What was difficult? So that's essentially a snapshot, so to speak, of the SNAP.
Yeah. So, and again, what number would I put in? Well, that's based on your individual progress, right? If you're not yet beyond 3-digit numbers, then that's probably where we're going to start, right? But I got to tell you, as I work in high schools in particular in mathematics, more often than not, the challenges can be tracked back to number sense, right? To the inability to understand in a variety of different ways what 234 really is. I know it comes before 235, but in terms of getting a sense of what that number represents. And so, what we're trying to do is peel back now to building this foundational piece, because why math is such a struggle, and by the way, such an accepted struggle. Justin, you could go to a social situation tonight and say, hey, you know what, I don't do math. And everybody would say, it's okay, it's only math. Don't worry about it. I don't do math either, right? I think it's all tracked back to we never built this foundational piece. Math is not about memorizing formulas. That's the application of math, right? When I watch my grandkids play, I think they love math. They love sorting. They love representing. They love organizing by shape, we've got to keep that joy, that wonder there. And I think if we can build this foundational aspect in K-8, pre-K-8, that number sense really means something, and this ability to represent that something, I think we're going to see better appreciation of mathematics in the high school grade.
What does number sense mean? Because I have kind of an intuitive sense of what number sense is, that it means kind of the sense that students have about numbers. Is there a more formal definition, or what does number sense mean to you?
So when I look at Marilyn Burns, who's an author, one of her definitions for number sense is that students with good number sense can think and reason flexibly with numbers, use numbers to solve problems, spot unreasonable answers, understand how numbers can be taken apart and put together in different ways, see connections among operations, figure mentally, and make reasonable estimates. These students seem to have a good intuition about numbers and see numbers as useful. And when I think about a personal example, I was recently traveling to Mexico and doing the conversion rate in my head, and I thought it was very challenging to do that. And that's kind of what number sense is. It's the ability to take a number, to be able to think flexibly, to understand it in multiple different ways. And the SNAP really is exquisite with that. It helps students to think about number in a variety of different ways.
We've all heard the notion of reasonableness in mathematics, right? Is the response reasonable? So if you had $20 and the item was $11, is it reasonable that you get $4 back, or is it not, right? And so that ability to manipulate, to say, I shared the example of walking into a math class and asking the kids what 1/3 of 12 was. And one kid immediately answered it with 4. And I thought, wow, this kid really gets it. So I thought, okay, moment for this kid to highlight. And I said, you have done that so quickly. I'm fast. I'd love to hear your method. He said, those are so easy. You just add the 1 and the 3. All right. Guess what? In math, sometimes you can get the right answer the wrong way. So did he have the right answer? Yes. Now, does his number sense kick in here? So, wow, that is really good. Does it work all the time? What would you say 2/3 of 12 is? And immediately he says 5. Oh, okay. Well, here's what we know. And here's where the rub comes in, right? So I let him know that 2/3 of 12 is actually 8. So now we know that 1/3 is 4 and 2/3 is 8. Now I need you to go back and work with one of your colleagues, one of your peers. What do you think? What might be the way we get there? And that's where, again, this number sense starts to kick in rather than a simple memorization of formula. Now, to be fair, for some kids, that memorization stuff's great. Look, if you have a great memory, you're going to be aces in high school math and science. You might not intuitively understand it, but there's a lot of rote memorization to it, right? If instead you can get to that ability to say, and here's why, that's number sense.
So we've talked a little bit about what the SNAP approach is. We've talked a little bit about what number sense is. Jonathan, I wonder if you could take us into a little bit of the history of how this tool and this practice developed and how teachers use it.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. A number of years ago, maybe in the early 2000s, we were working with an assessment that Hierck had designed, actually. It was called the Annie. And it was a one-page template, and we brought it into Chilliwack. And teachers were adopting it. But then we felt very strongly that it was important to create homegrown assessments, so to do something ourselves. So we gathered a number of teachers and principals, and our task was, let's design a brand new template. Let's think about what we want. We want to create something that's one page. We want to create something that's inviting, that's full of curiosity and wonder, because we know that math anxiety is very, very real. And we also know that we want students to be able to think about number. So we gathered and we designed and we came up with a number of different templates. We worked with John Mighton, who's an author of Jump Math. Sure. And then we developed that, and then we started to pilot it in our school district. And that was initially at grades 2 to 7. And a number of people were like really, really interested and really getting on board. And then I had kindergarten and grade 1 teacher in the school that I worked at. And they said, we'd like to do this too. Can we design something? Because we're seeing how powerful this is in the later grades. So they ended up designing the kindergarten grade 1 version. And the neighboring school districts were wanting to know about it. And all of a sudden, we've got people in British Columbia, 10 different school districts adopting SNAP and getting on board. So that was kind of the story of SNAP. And it's made its way out into a variety of different places because teachers really see the value of it. They see the value of a one-page assessment that's full of curiosity and wonder and thinking. And it's very much tied to the curriculum. Not only the curriculum in British Columbia, but it's tied to sort of curriculum everywhere, so to speak. And when I say that, I think about the 5 strands of mathematical thinking developed by the National Research Council in 2001, where they talk about conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. And the SNAP embodies those pieces in and of itself. So yes, we've designed it in Chilliwack, British Columbia, but if you're using it in a different district or a different region, you can be safe or assured to know that you're addressing mathematical thinking globally, so to speak.
Good deal. And I'll refer our listeners to my previous interview with John Mighton, who has developed quite a curriculum and quite a following for his Jump Math program. So glad to hear that you worked with him. Let's talk a little bit more about how teachers use what they find on the SNAP assessments that they administer to students, because of course we have lots of different ways of assessing. Teachers can observe students when they're using manipulatives. They can have students solve problems individually or collaboratively or on the board, a variety of different ways that the teachers get a sense of kind of where students are. But how do teachers use this particular tool in the classroom?
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. Part of it is this notion of a variety, right? So it's not just one way of representation. I think, again, if we're being honest, there's sometimes a lack of comfort with mathematical instruction in the lower grades. I think if you are in love with mathematics, if that's your jam, you're probably going up to the high school, if that's really what you love to do. As a result, and I know it's not a black and white statement, but as a result, if I'm not as comfortable, I tend to teach the way I was taught, which is a very limited and narrow sort of focal aspect. And so I don't have any other ways of, now I pull out this document and look, you've seen it. It's pretty simple to use, and it gives me a bunch of different ways of where this kid is struggling. I mean, if they don't know where 234 is on a number line, if they've got it before 100, we got some real challenges. If they can't count forward or back, or they aren't able to visualize what 234 is in any sort of representative model, then I'm probably having to dial back to, some of the single digit work before we get to 3-digit, etc. Jonathan, I know you've had a chance to work through this with some schools, and we've seen some evidence emerging. Maybe pick it up from there.
Yeah, so as Tom was talking about, to use it for, as, and of, and it's pretty rare to have an assessment that you can use for all three. So for is it informs the instruction. So you can use it whole class, you can use it in small group, you can use it individually, you can put it under the document camera, you can zoom in to certain aspects. You don't have to give the full template itself. So that provides information. And then the as is the students are learning while they're doing it. So they're becoming deeper, they're understanding, they're getting stronger in each of those areas. And then the of is you can use it at the end of at the end of the month or end of the unit or whatever it happens to be. And then that's your summative example. One of the pieces that's amazing about it is that it's low floor, high ceiling. And I had a student in the school that I worked in, and for the real life example, he was an aviation expert, or he loved planes. And this is a student in 5th grade or grade 5. And he knew how many seats there were on a Boeing 777. So if a large number was put into the middle of the circle, let's just say it's 10,000, he would be able to figure out, okay, that's 40, Boeing 777s, and then there's this many seats left over. And I was just like flabbergasted by that, because I'd never in my teaching career, worked in school, seen a student so excited about math, so able to take something and go and to explore and be curious about it. And you might see the curiosity in kindergarten, where students are coming into school and they're full of wonder and they're exploring. But that wonder and curiosity kind of fades as time goes on in the later grades. So here's a student in grade 5 and grade 6, full of wonder and full of joy, full of like inquisitiveness. And let's now play with math. And that's what we want. We want our students to be playful with it. We want them to think about it, to explore it, and to be open to it.
I love that. It's striking to think that the adults who love math tend to end up teaching secondary, and the students who love math tend to lose that love for math at secondary. So certainly makes sense that bringing some play into it, bringing some kind of appreciation and playfulness to our assessment, and thinking of that assessment not only as assessment of learning, but as you said, assessment for learning and assessment as learning, makes a lot of sense. Talk to us a little bit about what happens across the district, because certainly I can envision a single teacher using this type of tool with a single student to understand and gain some insight into where their thinking is and maybe what they need next. What are some of the bigger system level implications of using this tool?
Right. So when we first adopted SNAP, we had an implementation process where we had helping teachers go into every school, and we set aside time to do that. And as a principal at the time, it was very important to me to be a lead learner and to learn alongside. So I would join every meeting with the students with the teachers when we were learning about it. So the implementation process took some time. What I would do as a principal is I would look at the data, I would collect it, I would actually have a data board. I would write all this by hand actually on a whiteboard, and even though there's technology available, I'd have that data board right in front of me so I could see where the students were and where we needed to provide supports in my school along those pieces. So you would look at the data from a school point of view. The school district would actually collect the data as well in May and look at that. And then we would meet and talk about how can we support and what do we need to do differently and how do we need to address pieces within. Fits beautifully within the RTI model where you're supporting students and you're having things like team time and looking at common assessments in time. And I would provide time for teachers in my school to gather and collaborate and look at that. So the school district would look at that from a wide angle lens. And we also have provincial assessments called FSA, Foundational Skills Assessments, that looks at numeracy and literacy province-wide. And in fact, the Chilliwack School District has noticed, I think last year, for example, that the numeracy assessments at the FSA in grade 4 have been the best that they've ever been. So we've noticed a bump in the numeracy scores, or thinking over time.
I think that those are all sort of the positive trends, right? And again, I think all of us know it's not always so straightforward cause and effect, but it's hard to dismiss that the impact of a district that's been using this very effectively, that their results are not somehow connected to this practical rollout and implementation of this view of assessment. As I said, it's more about getting a degree of confidence, familiarity, comfort with all kids, right? I loved your analogy earlier, right? The kids who love math the most don't tend to get to the teachers who love the math the most until they stop loving math, right? And so how do we continue that joy, that wonder, that appreciation? Look, I'm not suggesting for a moment that 100% of our kids are going to be, because 100% of our kids don't love a bunch of other subjects. But we have to do something that dispels the notion that it's okay to not be good at math.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about what we do with this information in the classroom, because I think one of teachers' perpetual frustrations with standardized assessments is they don't get the information back quickly. They often don't get very detailed information about what their students know and are able to do. It might get boiled down into some sort of number. So having a more frequent, more timely assessment that they actually get to look at is probably very appealing to teachers. But then, of course, there's the question of, well, now what do I do with this? Because we have to move on to the next unit. We're not going to have the luxury of slowing down and taking as much time as we need to get all students to mastery. There are pacing considerations. So what do we do when we find a need, when we identify an instructional need from this assessment? What do teachers actually do in response to meet those needs?
So one of the pieces when I think about the number line example. So I recently was in Alberta and we were looking at the SNAP in middle schools. And we designed an activity called a number line clothesline math. So we could set up a clothesline in the class and we gave students different numbers. And we said, okay, here's where 0 is. Come up to the board and put where your number fits on the number line. And this is a result of the fact that their SNAP or their assessments would have shown that that's an area that they needed to work on. So it was an incredibly hands-on activity, and students would come up and then the other students would say, oh, I'm not sure if that should be moved to the left or to the right. And then there were so many teachable moments within that. So as you said, Justin, you provide the assessment itself, and then where do you go next? So one of the examples, number line, use clothesline math, and get the students involved and engaged. And where does that fit? And you can do that with each of the areas in number sense in the SNAP. If it's counting forwards and backwards, let's take the students outside and let's, climb some stairs and move back down some stairs. So based on the information that it gives you about your students, the for part, where do you go next? And this is what we can do next in terms of some of the activities or some of the teachable moments that we need to go after for some of these pieces.
But I'm hearing a ton about number lines all of a sudden, and I don't really remember using number lines as a kid. I don't know if they're something that has really come to the fore in the meantime, but it's interesting to hear that theme of number lines being powerful for helping kids develop number sense and get a sense of proportion and be able to have better intuitions about numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And you can leave the number line up in the classroom and you could have, particular integers, like 1, -1 and all of those different pieces. And then you can think about, let's put a number line below that. And now let's look at fractions. Where does that fraction line up in terms of the number line that's above? And then we can go below and let's draw pictures. What does that look like from a picture point of view? And all of this is done to promote thinking and engagement, as opposed to we're just going to do some worksheets and we're going to write out 40 practice questions and we're going to just do the math. We're going to cross off the 0, put the 9 up and just do it. Just do the procedure as opposed to understanding the concept. That's where, SNAP comes in terms of, where are the students? But it's what you do next also invites that curiosity, engagement with the students and playfulness. And yes, we want to get the right answer and there is accuracy, but we can do it from a growth mindset. We can do it from a playful and an inquisitive point of view, which is really, really important.
And you also draw some connections to response to intervention as well.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest piece and perhaps, one of the absolute strengths of this tool is that it does give that clarity that response intervention, tier 2 and tier 3 are predicated on quality evidence being gathered at tier 1. Not a supposition, not a feeling, again, go back to my example of if a kid gets 1/3 of 12 by adding the 1 and the 3 and they get it right, and all we do is say that kid's got it right, we're missing out on an opportunity to intervene because it's got some capacity, but not really quite what we need, right? So how do we set up our tier 2 and our tier 3 based on what evidence? When you've got a tool that gives you 7 or so different entry points, you got to believe that it's going to make what comes next much more viable, acceptable, and engaging for the student, right? So again, and you know this probably, from your own research, but that Burger King trying to launch the 1/3 pounder and how it crashed because nobody could figure out that was actually bigger than the 1/4 pounder, right? I mean, that's the clearest example of a lack of number sense that we might want to, right? And so there are consequences to not having number sense, right?
Yeah, when I think of data-driven instruction, this is where SNAP comes in perfectly. High quality, collective responsibility, all of those pieces, the RTI, it just fits in. And when I was at my school, it was one of the foundational pieces that we used for numeracy. Literacy seems to get the priority, and numeracy seems to be kind of like the second cousin. And we're going to look at that a little bit later. We're going to pay attention to it, but literacy, we're going to, put a lot of funding towards that and it is important. Literacy is very important, but to be numerate is also extremely important. So we use the SNAP in our school to embed within the RTI framework and where are our students, what do we need to do next? And as I was explaining earlier, I had my data wall right in front of me on my whiteboard. So I had all the students that we were sort of wondering about, where do we need to go next? And, those are the tier 2 and the tier 3. And so it was right in front of us, and we were able to design and adapt and work collaboratively around that to try to improve our students' understanding of numeracy.
As I said, I think, capacity, as we keep hearing, and Jonathan just shared, this isn't about, hey, we don't want you to do literacy. This is about trying to come up with a way that puts them on par. Successful adults are both literate and numerate, not either or, right? And so how do we help now to continue this notion of number sense, this continuation of this love of mathematics that I think is evident in our younger kids?
Yeah, just one other piece, Justin, is we want to be mindful that SNAP is not just a worksheet, because it can turn into a worksheet, and we don't want that to happen. So, you can zoom in, you can take different parts. And I have a teacher colleague who's actually designed different formats for the SNAP. So instead of the page itself, he's created a pirate ship. So now students can look at where are they on the ship, count backwards and forwards, where they're climbing the sails and doing those kind of things, or a spaceship, or students jumping a line. In that particular classroom, the students are able to go up on the windows because they have certain examples that you can draw on the windows, with erasable markers. So it's important for the novelty to be maintained as well, because we know that students can become, bored, or things can become a little bit redundant when they look at the same thing over and over again. So the brain likes novelty, so it's important to embed that within this as well.
So the book is The SNAP Solution, an innovative math assessment tool for grades K through 8. Jonathan and Tom, thank you so much for joining me on Principal Center Radio.
Thank you, Justin.
Thanks, Justin. It's always good to be with you.
Thanks for listening to Principal Center Radio. For more great episodes, subscribe on our website at principalcenter.com/radio.